She smirked and said, "You're not going anywhere. You need me more than I need you," after I threatened to end things. I smiled back and said, "Let's test that theory." What she discovered 4 months later made her realize how wrong she was. I, 32M, never thought my life would turn into the kind of story people share on forums like this, but here I am, for months after everything changed, finally ready to tell what happened. It started with a promotion that should have been mine. 8 years at the marketing firm, countless late nights, weekend projects, and being the go-to person for every crisis. When the creative director position opened up, everyone assumed it was mine. Hell, I assumed it was mine. Then they hired her. She walked into our office like she owned the place, designer heels clicking against the polished floor, portfolio tucked under her arm like a weapon. The partners introduced her as our new creative director, fresh from some hotshot agency in New York. She was everything they wanted, polished, confident, and completely unaware that she'd just stepped into what everyone considered my spot. The first few weeks were professional enough. She kept her distance, probably sensing the tension from the team who'd expected my promotion. But then she started making changes. Small ones at first, restructuring meeting schedules, implementing new approval processes, reassigning accounts. Each change felt like a deliberate undermining of the systems I'd helped build. The breaking point came during the Henderson account presentation. I'd spent 3 weeks developing a campaign concept that perfectly captured their brand vision. The night before the presentation, she called me into her office and told me she was scrapping my entire concept in favor of something more innovative. When I protested, explaining how my approach aligned with everything the client had requested, she just smiled that cold smile I'd grown to hate. She told me I was thinking too small, that my ideas lacked the sophistication their New York clients expected. The dismissal in her voice was unmistakable. She'd decided I was small-time, someone to be managed rather than collaborated with. The next morning, she presented her concept to Henderson. It was flashy, expensive, and completely wrong for their target demographic. I watched their faces fall as she explained her vision, something that belonged in a Manhattan gallery, not a mid-sized city's family-oriented business. They politely declined and started looking for another agency. That afternoon, she called me into her office again. This time, she blamed me for not properly briefing her on the client's needs. According to her, my background research was insufficient, and my failure to communicate their preferences had led to the disaster. She was writing me up for inadequate performance. I'd had enough. I told her I was done with her games and power trips. I was ready to quit, to find somewhere that actually valued my experience and contributions. That's when she leaned back in her chair, that smirk spreading across her face like poison. She told me I wasn't going anywhere, that I needed this job more than she needed me to stay. She'd done her research, she said. She knew about my mortgage, my car payments, my mother's medical bills. She knew I couldn't afford to leave without another position lined up, and she'd make sure no respectable agency in the city would hire me if I caused problems for her. The arrogance in her voice was breathtaking. She genuinely believed she held all the cards, that I was trapped in whatever dynamic she wanted to create. She thought she could break me down, make me into some grateful subordinate who'd appreciate keeping his job despite her leadership. I looked at her sitting there, so sure of herself, so certain she'd cornered me perfectly. That's when I smiled back and told her we should test that theory. The confusion that flickered across her face was the first crack in her confidence I'd seen since she arrived. I didn't quit that day. Instead, I went home and started planning. The first thing I did was update my portfolio. Every successful campaign I'd led, every client relationship I'd built, every piece of creative work that had driven real results, I documented it all. Then I started reaching out to former colleagues who'd moved to other agencies. Not for jobs, but for coffee meetings, casual conversations about industry trends, innocent catch-ups that gradually revealed which agencies were growing and might need experienced talent. She thought she knew my financial situation, but she'd made assumptions. Yes, I had bills and responsibilities, but I'd also been saving for years. Living below my means wasn't glamorous, but it had given me something more valuable than luxury: options. While she focused on consolidating her power at the office, I was building something else entirely. I reached out to 3 former clients who'd been unhappy when their accounts got reassigned after she arrived. Casual conversations revealed they weren't thrilled with their new agency relationships. They remembered the results I'd delivered and the personal attention I'd given their accounts. The beauty of revenge, I discovered, isn't in the grand gestures. It's in the quiet preparation, the patient building of alternatives while your opponent assumes they've already won. 2 months after our confrontation, I had 3 freelance contracts lined up with former clients. Small projects initially, but enough to supplement my income while I made my next move. I also had preliminary conversations with 2 agencies interested in my experience, though I wasn't ready to commit to anything yet. She continued her reign at the office, making increasingly unpopular decisions. The team's initial skepticism about her leadership had hardened into quiet resentment. She'd managed to lose 2 more major accounts with her insistence on concepts that looked impressive in presentations but failed to connect with actual customers. The partners started asking questions. Subtle at first, casual inquiries about client feedback, gentle suggestions about market research. She deflected with talk about long-term brand building and the need to elevate our creative standards. But I could see the doubt creeping in. That's when I made my move. I scheduled a meeting with the senior partner, ostensibly to discuss my role and future with the company. I'd prepared carefully, framing everything in terms of client success and agency reputation rather than personal grievances. I presented a detailed analysis of account performance since the restructuring, complete with client feedback and revenue impacts. The numbers told the story I couldn't say directly. Account satisfaction was down, client retention was suffering, and the agency's reputation in the market was taking hits. I positioned myself not as someone complaining about management, but as someone concerned about the company's trajectory. When he asked what I thought needed to change, I told him honestly that I'd been exploring other opportunities. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I wasn't sure there was a path forward for someone with my background under the current creative direction. The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, he was asking what it would take to keep me, what role I envisioned for myself, and how I thought we could address the client concerns I'd outlined. I left that meeting knowing I'd planted the right seeds. Update 1. 3 weeks later, everything started falling apart for her. It began with the Morrison account, our biggest client and longest relationship. They'd been with the agency for 8 years, mostly because of the personal relationship I'd built with their marketing director. She decided to freshen up their campaign with a complete rebrand that ignored everything that had made their previous marketing successful. The presentation was a disaster. Morrison's team sat in stunned silence as she unveiled a concept that would have been perfect for a trendy startup but was completely wrong for their established family business. When they started asking questions about target demographics and brand continuity, her answers revealed how little she understood their market position. They didn't just reject the proposal, they terminated the contract. 8 years of relationship and steady revenue, gone in one meeting. The partners called an emergency review. I wasn't in that meeting, but the aftermath was visible to everyone. She came out looking shaken, the confident smirk replaced by something closer to panic. That's when my freelance work started paying unexpected dividends. The 3 former clients I'd been working with had been so happy with the results that they'd started recommending me to their networks. What had begun as small supplementary projects was growing into something much larger. One of those referrals led to the opportunity I'd been waiting for. A mid-sized agency across town had been looking for a creative director for months. They'd approached me not because I was job hunting, but because multiple clients had mentioned my work. The conversation felt different from typical job interviews. They were courting me, not the other way around. The offer they made was substantial. Not just more money, but equity in the agency, creative control, and the chance to build a department from the ground up. It was everything I'd wanted from my current job, everything I'd been denied when they hired her instead. I didn't accept immediately. Instead, I used the offer as leverage for one final conversation with my current employer. I met with the senior partner again, this time with the competing offer in hand. I explained that while I appreciated the agency and the relationships I'd built there, I needed to consider my future carefully. The Morrison loss had highlighted some fundamental differences in creative vision, and I'd received an opportunity that aligned better with my approach. He asked what it would take to keep me. I told him honestly that I didn't think it was possible under the current structure. The creative direction conflict wasn't personal, but it was fundamental. We had different philosophies about client relationships and campaign development. That's when he surprised me. He asked if I thought the agency would be better served with a different creative structure. whether perhaps someone with my client relationships and market understanding might be better positioned to lead the creative department. The conversation that followed was delicate. I couldn't directly campaign for her removal. That would have looked petty and unprofessional. Instead, I focused on what would serve the agency best: client retention, market reputation, and sustainable growth. I also mentioned that several former clients had approached me about working together again, not as an ultimatum, but as information he should have for planning purposes. Update 2. The dominoes fell faster than I'd expected. 2 days after my meeting with the senior partner, she was called into a closed-door session with all 3 partners. The conversation lasted most of the afternoon. When she emerged, her face was pale and her usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. The official announcement came the next morning. The agency was restructuring the creative department to better serve client needs. She would be transitioning to a consulting role, working on special projects while they evaluated the department's future direction. Everyone knew what that meant. It was a face-saving exit strategy, giving her time to find another position while removing her from day-to-day operations. The partners asked me to temporarily oversee creative direction while they determined the department's permanent structure. It wasn't the promotion I'd originally wanted, but it was something better, validation that my approach had been right all along. The team's relief was palpable. People who'd been walking on eggshells for months suddenly felt free to contribute ideas again. The Morrison account was gone, but I immediately started reaching out to other former clients to rebuild relationships and explore new opportunities. She tried to maintain her dignity during the transition, but the mask was slipping. The woman who'd been so confident about my inability to leave, who'd been certain she held all the power, was suddenly scrambling to find her next position. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd thought she understood leverage, but she'd fundamentally misread the situation. She'd assumed that need and power were the same thing, that having bills to pay meant accepting whatever treatment she decided to dish out. What she hadn't understood was that real leverage comes from being valuable, not from making others feel trapped. While she'd been focused on controlling people, I'd been focused on delivering results. While she'd been building walls, I'd been building bridges. Her consulting arrangement lasted exactly 6 weeks. Without direct authority over projects or client relationships, her value to the agency became questionable quickly. The partners made the final decision after another former client specifically requested that she not be involved in their potential return to the agency. Her last day was awkward for everyone. She packed her office with forced dignity, accepting congratulations on her new opportunities that everyone knew didn't exist yet. When she stopped by my desk to say goodbye, I could see the recognition in her eyes, the understanding that I'd played a longer game than she'd anticipated. She told me she hoped I'd be happy with my victory. There was bitterness in her voice, but also something that might have been respect. She'd finally realized that the quiet guy she'd dismissed as trapped and powerless had actually been the one holding the better cards all along. I told her I hoped she'd find something that was a better fit for her style. I meant it. The revenge had never been about destroying her. It had been about proving that she'd misjudged the situation completely. Update 3. 4 months after she'd told me I wasn't going anywhere, I was offered the permanent creative director position with a significant raise and expanded responsibilities. More importantly, I had the autonomy to rebuild the department according to principles that actually worked: client focus, team collaboration, and results-driven creativity. The agency's recovery was faster than anyone expected. Former clients started returning, attracted by the familiar approach and renewed focus on their actual needs rather than industry trends. The team's morale improved dramatically once they felt heard and valued again. I learned later that she'd struggled to find another position. Her reputation had followed her. Word travels fast in our industry, and the Morrison account loss had become a cautionary tale about prioritizing style over substance. She eventually took a position with a smaller agency at a significant pay cut. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about her failure. It was about proving a point that had been important to me. She'd looked at my responsibilities and bills and seen weakness. A person who could be pushed around because he couldn't afford to push back. She'd confused circumstance with character. What she'd missed was that stability and planning aren't signs of being trapped. They're signs of being prepared. Having a mortgage doesn't make you desperate. It makes you motivated to build something lasting. Having people depending on you doesn't make you weak. it makes you resourceful. The real victory wasn't getting her job or seeing her struggle. It was proving that patient, strategic thinking beats aggressive posturing every time. She'd played checkers while I was playing chess, focusing on immediate power while I was building long-term position. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for that confrontation in her office. Her smirk and her certainty that she held all the cards forced me to examine my own position honestly. It made me realize that I'd been passive for too long, accepting situations instead of actively shaping them. When she told me I needed the job more than she needed me to stay, she'd been technically correct about the financial pressure. But she'd completely misunderstood what that pressure would motivate me to do. Instead of making me compliant, it made me strategic. Instead of accepting her terms, it forced me to create better options. The phrase, "test that theory," became something of a department joke afterward. Whenever someone claimed something was impossible or that we had no choice in a situation, someone would inevitably suggest we test that theory. It became shorthand for refusing to accept limitations without exploring alternatives. I still see her occasionally at industry events. She's professional when we interact, but there's always a flicker of something in her expression, recognition, maybe, or the memory of being so completely wrong about someone. She'd thought she was dealing with a desperate employee who would accept anything to keep his job. Instead, she'd been challenging someone who just needed the right motivation to prove her wrong. The experience taught me something valuable about power dynamics and assumptions. She'd looked at my situation and seen vulnerability, but she'd missed the foundation of experience, relationships, and reputation I'd built over years. She'd focused on what I couldn't afford to lose instead of what I'd already built to gain. In the end, her biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my abilities or misreading my character. It was assuming that her position gave her power over situations she didn't fully understand. Real influence comes from creating value, not from threatening to take it away. For months after she'd been so certain I wasn't going anywhere, she discovered just how wrong someone can be when they confuse temporary leverage with permanent power. Sometimes the best revenge is simply proving that the other person fundamentally misunderstood the game they thought they were playing. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the like and subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.